Hello, friends. I'm here with a very enjoyable science fiction story. In this episode, I will tell you the story of human soldier Cooper and alien captain Arya. Buckle up and enjoy the story. Happy watching. The rookie accidentally sat down at the table of the galaxy's most feared alien woman. The thing about Fortress Draven's mess hall at 1800 hours was that it ran on a kind of feral clockwork, and Cooper did not yet know the clock existed, let alone how to read it. 3 days into his enlistment, he still walked everywhere with the specific gait of a man who suspected the floor might file a complaint about him. He had learned a great many things in those 3 days. How to fold a bedroll into a shape that would satisfy a sergeant. How to salute without accidentally hitting himself in the eye. How to eat a ration bar without weeping. But he had not yet learned the geography of the room he was currently trying to survive. It was loud in the way only a few hundred soldiers can manage. Trays clattered. Someone at the far end was losing an argument about whether the meatloaf was technically meat, technically loaf, or an ambitious third thing entirely. The recyclers hummed under the deck plating with the patient resentment of machines that had been promised maintenance and would clearly not be receiving it. Cooper moved through all of it with his tray held out like an offering to gods he hadn't been introduced to yet, scanning for a seat, his eyes everywhere except in front of him. This was his mistake. There is always a mistake, and it is almost always located directly in front of you. He found the empty seat with the relief of a drowning man finding a plank. The whole table was open, in fact, a gleaming, uncrowded stretch of surface in a room where men were currently negotiating for 6 inches of bench space like it was prime real estate. Cooper did not question this. Cooper, in his infinite 3-day wisdom, thought, lucky. He set his tray down. He sat. He got one leg comfortably under the table. And then the room stopped. Not gradually. Not the way a conversation dies when someone says something they shouldn't. It stopped the way a machine stops when the power is cut, all at once, mid-motion, so that a fork somewhere clinked against a tray, and the sound of it traveled the length of the hall like a rifle shot. 200 soldiers, hardened by campaigns Cooper couldn't spell yet, had all simultaneously discovered something fascinating about the ceiling, their boots, or the middle distance. Nobody was looking at him. Nobody was looking at him so hard that it was paradoxically the loudest thing in the room. Cooper became aware, slowly, in the manner of a man realizing he has walked into the ladies' restroom, that something had gone catastrophically sideways. He looked up. Across the table sat a woman. She was blue, not sickly, not painted, but a deep, cool blue like the underside of a wave, like something the ocean had made on purpose. Her ears swept back and up into long, elegant points that caught the mess hall light. And her eyes, when they lifted from her meal, were the specific sapphire of a thing that has watched a great many people make a great many bad decisions and has simply run out of reasons to be surprised by any of it. They rose from her tray, unhurried, and settled on Cooper with the weight of a closing airlock. Somewhere behind him a man whispered, "Oh no," with the tender grief of someone watching a puppy walk onto a firing range. Now. Cooper did not know who she was. This is the important part. Cooper had missed the orientation briefing that covered names you do not say above a whisper, because he had spent that particular hour trapped in a supply closet whose door had a philosophical objection to opening. So he did not know that the woman across from him was Arya, captain of the Iron Wake, and that her name got spoken in the same sentence as burned worlds and vanished fleets, and that every veteran in that room had, at some point, made a private and sincere arrangement with the universe to never be within arm's reach of her. He didn't know that the table was empty the way a minefield is empty. He only knew that a very striking, very blue woman was staring at him, that he had apparently done something, and that his hands had begun to shake in a way he found personally embarrassing. So he did the only thing his panicking, uneducated brain could produce. "Sorry," he mumbled. Is this taken?" It was, objectively, the wrong question. The seat was aggressively not taken. The seat had been not taken with such intensity for so long that it had achieved a kind of legendary vacancy. But the words fell out of him anyway, and hung there in the silence, and Arya's eyes did something almost imperceptible. a flicker, a fractional narrowing, the expression of a person who has just heard a note she did not expect in a song she thought she'd memorized. Cooper, receiving no answer and lacking the sense to flee, picked up his fork. He ate. His hands trembled around the utensil so badly that a pea rolled off it and completed a small, doomed voyage across the tray. He recaptured it. He did not look up again, because looking up was clearly how all of this had started, and he was not eager to compound his sins. He simply ate, quietly, terribly, in the loudest silence Fortress Draven had produced in living memory, a rookie who had blundered into the one chair in the galaxy no one dared to claim. And Arya watched him. She had spent years, long, grinding years, watching grown warriors find urgent business elsewhere the moment she entered a room. She had learned the choreography of it. The averted eyes, the way conversations lowered and quickened, the small, brave nods from men who then took the long way around. She knew what her shadow did to people. She had, if she was honest, stopped expecting anything else. And here was this. This trembling, apologetic, spectacularly uninformed young man, eating his questionable meatloaf with the shaking hands of someone who was frightened of something but plainly, absurdly, did not know it was her. Who had sat down, not out of courage. She'd have recognized courage. She had a low opinion of it, but out of sheer, blessed ignorance. He had dropped into the seat no one would take, and now he was too polite and too flustered to leave. The hall waited. 200 soldiers held a collective breath, braced for the explosion they had all seen the aftermath of, and none had witnessed the cause. Arya lifted her cup, took a slow sip, and set it down. She said nothing, and she did not tell him to leave. Cooper survived the meal. This was, according to the mess hall's unofficial historians, a first, and by the time he returned to his bunk that night, the story had already outrun him, mutating with each retelling until one version had him challenging Arya to single combat, and another had him weeping into his tray. The truth, that he had eaten a bad meatloaf very fast and left without making eye contact, was somehow less believable than any of the lies, and so nobody bothered with it. He learned who she was at approximately 0600 the next morning, when his bunkmate Oliver sat down across from him at breakfast, looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man visiting a hospital, and said, "So, you're either the bravest person on this station or the stupidest, and I've been up all night, and I still can't decide which." "What are you talking about?" said Cooper, who had slept the deep sleep of the ignorant. "The table." Oliver lowered his voice to the register normally reserved for confessing crimes. "You sat at her table. You know whose table that is? There was an empty seat." "There is always an empty seat," Oliver hissed. "There is always an entire empty table, Cooper, and there is a reason, and the reason is that the woman who sits there is Arya, captain of the Iron Wake." He said the name the way you'd say a diagnosis. "They call her the Ashmaker. You know Kessen's world? The colony that isn't there anymore? That was her. There was a whole battle group, the 9th, went out past the Veil chasing the Scour and just didn't come back. And the last transmission anybody got had her voice on it. Grown men who've been to the front 6 times will get up and eat standing in a corridor before they'll sit near her. And you." Oliver gestured at Cooper with a piece of toast, at a loss for a verb grand enough. "You asked her if the seat was taken." Cooper set down his coffee very carefully, as though it had become dangerous. "It was open," he said weakly. "The whole thing was open. I thought I was lucky." "You thought you were lucky." Oliver put his face in his hands. He thought he was lucky. The floor was clear because it was on fire, and he thought he found a nice bit of carpet. Cooper spent the rest of breakfast reviewing, in horrified detail, everything he now knew about the woman he had shared a silent meal with, and by the time his tray was empty, he had arrived at a firm and sensible policy. He would never, under any circumstances, go anywhere near her again. He would treat that corner of the mess hall as a decommissioned reactor. He would, if necessary, learn to eat in the supply closet that hated him. This resolution felt mature and survivable and lasted, by Oliver's later estimate, About 11 hours. The problem was that Fortress Draven ran its duty rosters through a scheduling system that had been written, everyone agreed, by someone who despised human happiness. It was a sprawling, ancient program that assigned shifts according to logic no living soul could follow, and it had, in its infinite malice, decided that Recruit Cooper and the Iron Wake's captain should keep colliding. He drew hangar deck cleaning and she came through inspecting the fighters. He got sent to the requisitions desk and she was next in line, waiting on a part with an expression that could curdle coolant. He turned a corner carrying a crate too tall to see over and walked directly into her, and the crate went one way and Cooper went the other, and a great many small mechanical components achieved brief, joyful freedom across the deck. "Sorry," Cooper said from the floor. It was becoming his catchphrase. Arya looked down at him. There was that flicker again. The one from the table, the almost curiosity, as if she were collecting data on a phenomenon she hadn't yet classified. "You say that a great deal," she observed. Her voice was low and even, and carried the faint musical accent of somewhere very far from here. "I have a lot to be sorry for," said Cooper, gathering bolts. "It's kind of a full-time thing. And that, inexplicably, against all the rules of the fortress, was the moment the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Nothing so committed. But a movement, a small structural shift, the geological event that precedes a smile by several thousand years. She crouched, picked up a single stray gyro coupling that had rolled to her boot, and set it on the deck beside his hand. Then she stood and walked on without another word, and Cooper stayed kneeling there among his liberated hardware, feeling as though something enormous and quiet had just happened that he did not have the clearance to understand. He was still thinking about it that evening when Admiral Adrian's face filled every screen on the station for the weekly briefing. Adrian was the sort of man the recruitment posters were modeled on, and then toned down for realism. Silver at the temples, jaw like a docking clamp, a smile that arrived precisely on schedule and left the moment its work was done. He spoke warmly of the war against the Scour, of sacrifice, of the fortress holding the line at the edge of known space. He was, Cooper thought, extremely reassuring, in the way of a man who has practiced being reassuring in a mirror. Near the end, cataloging the station's assets, Adrian mentioned the Iron Wake. He said Arya's name the way a man mentions a stain on an otherwise excellent record. A brief, cool pause, a flicker of distaste smoothed over at once with that scheduled smile. A capable asset, he called her, when properly directed. And moved on. Cooper noticed it. He didn't know why he noticed it, only that it sat wrong, the way the empty table had sat wrong before he understood it. Everyone feared her, but the Admiral, alone in that whole fortress, hadn't looked afraid at all. He'd looked like a man discussing a tool he intended to be rid of. And Cooper, 3 days and a bit into a war he barely understood, filed that away without knowing where the drawer was, or what he'd eventually find inside it. The way Cooper ended up aboard the Iron Wake was, like most disasters in his young military career, a matter of standing in the wrong place with a clipboard. A supply transfer had been scheduled, a crate of coolant regulators bound for Arya's ship, and the corporal who was supposed to escort it had come down with what the infirmary generously called a stomach complaint, and what everyone else called the meatloaf. So the roster, that malicious ancient program, reached out with its cold logic and selected the nearest available body, which was, of course, Cooper, holding a clipboard he did not remember being given. He walked the crate up the Iron Wake's boarding ramp, fully expecting to leave it at the threshold like an offering and retreat. Instead, a hatch sealed behind him with a pneumatic sigh, and a voice came out of the ceiling, bright, dry, and entirely too pleased with itself. "Oh, wonderful," it said. "It's the Meatloaf Boy." Cooper looked up. "The what?" "You're famous," said the voice. "You sat at her table and lived. Do you know the odds I ran on that? I ran the odds. They were rude. I'm Nova, by the way. I run this ship, keep it flying, keep the captain from having to talk to people, that sort of thing. Set the crate down before you drop it. You've got the grip strength of a wet napkin." The Iron Wake, it turned out, was a lean and ugly and beautiful thing, all exposed conduit and hard-won scars, a ship that had clearly been rebuilt more times than it had been designed. And its AI, Nova, was the single most talkative entity Cooper had ever encountered, an intelligence that had apparently decided long ago that silence was a design flaw and set about correcting it personally. She guided him toward the cargo bay, narrating. And because Cooper was a good listener, and Nova was a machine that had gone years with an audience of exactly one taciturn captain, she talked. Oh, she talked. "You want to know about her," Nova said. It wasn't a question. Everybody does. They just want to know from a safe distance, preferably behind a wall. You're the first one who's actually stood inside the ship and not asked to leave. I wasn't going to ask about Kessin's world, Nova said, and the brightness dimmed a shade. That's the one they whisper. The colony she burned. You've heard the version where she's a monster. Everybody's heard that version. Would you like the version with the parts left in? Cooper set the crate down. He found, to his own surprise, that he did. So Nova told him. There had been a bioswarm, a scour weapon, a self-replicating thing that got into living tissue and rewrote it. And it had made planetfall on Kessin's world, and it was spreading, and the models all said the same thing. Contained, it killed a colony. Uncontained, past the atmosphere, into the shipping lanes, it killed 1 billion people across 12 worlds, and then kept going. There was a window. It was very small, and Command, the same Command that later found it convenient to forget, had sat in a room and understood exactly what had to happen, and then, to a man, found reasons not to be the one to give the order. They looked at each other, Nova said, quieter now, and nobody's hand moved. And she was the one who reached out and did the arithmetic nobody else would sign their name to. She burned it. She saved the 12 worlds by giving up the one, and she did it knowing precisely what they'd call her afterward. And then she let them call her that, because the alternative was arguing, and she was tired. The cargo bay was very quiet. Somewhere in the hull, coolant ticked through a line. "The 9th, Cooper said. "The battle group that didn't come back." "The Scour Armada was going to hit the inner colonies," Nova said. She lured them into a decaying rift, a fold in space that was already coming apart. She took them in, and she brought her people to the edge and out the far side, and the enemy fleet went into the collapse and simply stopped being anywhere. The 9th didn't come back because the 9th flew home the long way under comms blackout and got written up as lost before anyone bothered to check. She let that stand too. A pause. She lets a lot stand. It's very annoying. I've filed complaints. I'm an AI, I have nowhere to file them, so I just tell her, and she ignores me, which is its own kind of relationship. Cooper was still absorbing this when the cargo bay door opened and Arya was there, having clearly heard some unknowable portion of it. She looked at Nova's nearest sensor cluster with the flat expression of a woman who has caught a friend telling her secrets at a party. "You are a leak with a personality matrix," she told the ceiling. "I'm company," Nova said, wounded. Arya turned to Cooper, and there it was again, that flicker, except closer now, unguarded in a way it hadn't been in the mess hall. She was braced. He understood suddenly that she was waiting for the thing that always came next. The recalculation behind the eyes, the small, polite horror, the man deciding she was after all exactly what he'd been told. It didn't come. Cooper just looked at her, and what he felt, standing in the guts of her scarred and lovely ship with the whole terrible arithmetic of Kessin's world laid out in front of him, was not fear. It was something closer to sorrow on her behalf, and underneath it, a plain, uncomplicated wish that someone had once sat down across from her without needing to be told it was safe. "That sounds," he said carefully, "like the worst day anybody ever had, and they made you keep it." Arya said nothing for a long moment. Whatever she'd armored herself against, it wasn't that. Something in her shoulders eased by a fraction of a degree, the structural precursor again to a thing much larger and much further off. "Get off my ship, recruit," she said. But it came out almost gentle, and Nova, delighted, added, "She likes you. That's her likes you voice. I've cataloged 4 of her voices, and that's easily the rarest." And Arya said, "Nova." and Cooper walked back down the ramp feeling as if the floor, for once, was entirely on his side. The scour hit Fortress Draven at 0412, which is a deeply unfair hour to be attacked, and Cooper's first indication that his life was about to become considerably more complicated was the sensation of being thrown out of his bunk by the station itself. Alarms followed. That particular klaxon that means the fortress has stopped being a place you live in and started being a place you are trying to survive. Oliver, in the bunk above, hit the floor beside him with the boneless grace of a man who had been asleep and was now extremely awake. "That's the wall breach tone," Oliver said, going pale. We don't get that tone. Draven doesn't get hit. It's the whole point of Draven." He was right, which was the thing that would matter later. Fortress Draven sat behind layered detection screens that made a surprise attack theoretically impossible. You could not reach it without being seen from a very long way off, and a very long way off was the whole idea. And yet here was the scour, inside the screen, punching through the outer ring like a fist through a paper wall, hitting the docking spires and the fuel lines and the defense batteries. Hitting, Cooper would realize much later, exactly the things you would hit if someone had handed you a map with the important parts circled in red. The next hours were a smear of corridors and heat and being shouted at usefully. Cooper carried wounded, ran cabling to a battery that had lost power, and at one point put out a fire with an extinguisher he was fairly sure had expired before he was born. The Iron Wake and the fortress's own guns broke the assault before it could gut the station, and by the time the all-clear sounded, Draven was scorched and venting in 3 places, but alive. Cooper sat down against a bulkhead, filthy and shaking, and thought that was the worst of it. It was not the worst of it. The worst of it started in a briefing room. "It's not possible without inside coordinates," Admiral Adrian was saying when Cooper, summoned along with half the surviving duty roster to give witness accounts, arrived at the back of the room. Adrian looked immaculate. Some men roll out of a disaster looking like the disaster. Adrian had somehow found time to be pressed. "They knew our patrol gaps. They knew the fuel line routing. They hit the sensor relay first, the one target that blinds us to an approach. This was not luck. Someone on this station fed them everything." A murmur. And then Adrian said the name, and he said it the way Cooper had heard him say it before, cool and smooth and already decided. The Iron Wake was the only vessel with independent access to the relay schedules. Captain Arya has, as we all know, a history of unilateral action and divided loyalties. The scheduled smile, brief and cold. "I'm not accusing. I'm observing. But I think we all understand what we're looking at." And the terrible thing, the thing that turned Cooper's stomach, was how quickly the room believed it. Not because it made sense. It made no sense. Arya's ship had spent the whole attack between the scour and the station's civilian levels, but because it was easy. Because they already feared her, and fear is a lazy detective. It takes the first suspect that fits the shape of the nightmare and goes home. Cooper watched 40 exhausted people decide, in the space of a sentence, to hang the whole catastrophe on the one soldier who had actually saved them, and he understood he was watching it happen a second time. The same machine that had made her the Ashmaker was warming up to do it again. He found her in the Iron Wake's cargo bay, because of course, that was where she was. She had walked out of the briefing before they finished, which everyone would take as guilt, and which Cooper now knew was simply a woman who had run out of the will to argue. "Don't," Arya said, before he'd said anything. She didn't turn around. "You don't want to be seen down here. Not today." "They're wrong," Cooper said. "It doesn't matter that they're wrong." She was checking a coupling with more care than it needed, giving her hand something honest to do. "It matters that it's convenient. I've been the convenient answer before. You learn to recognize the weather." "Well, I don't recognize it," said Cooper. "On account of I've only been here about a week and a half, and I keep getting assigned to you by a computer that hates me, so I've got no idea how to sit still and let this happen. Nova, help me out." "Oh, thank the void. Someone wants to actually solve it," Nova said instantly, lighting the bay with a schematic. "I've been screaming into the captain's audio pickups for 2 hours, and she just keeps sighing at me. Look at this. The relay schedules Adrian says only we could access." "Accessed, yes. But the query didn't originate here. It bounced through our systems to look like it did. Somebody laundered it through the iron wake so the trail would end at the scariest door in the fortress. It's crude. It's honestly a little insulting. Whoever did it assumed nobody would check the ship they were all too frightened to board. Arya finally turned. She looked at Cooper, this trembling, soot-streaked recruit who had walked into the one place on the station guaranteed to make him a suspect by association, purely because he'd decided the story was wrong, and something crossed her face that was well past the flicker now. "You'll be throwing away a career you've barely started," she said quietly. "For me, you understand that." "I've mostly been throwing it away by walking into crates," Cooper said. "This is at least a better reason." Oliver arrived then, breathless, having tracked Cooper down out of loyalty, and immediately regretting every choice that had led him aboard the accused ship. "I want it on record," he announced to the room, "that I think this is a terrible idea. I'm doing it anyway, and I'm the one who's actually good with systems, so nobody touch anything until I've looked at it." He caught sight of Arya and added faintly, "Ma'am, Captain, Asham, sorry, Captain," and went the color of coolant. Arya looked at the three of them, a leak with a personality matrix, a recruit who couldn't carry a crate, and a panicking systems tech going gently blue, and did something Nova would later swear had not happened in her recorded memory. She almost, very nearly, smiled. It took Oliver 4 hours, 2 energy drinks of dubious provenance, and 1 small emotional crisis to follow the laundered query back to its source, and when he finally did, he sat back from the console in the Iron Wake's cargo bay and said in a very small voice, oh no, it's him, it's the Admiral." The trail, once Oliver stripped away the layers meant to end it at Arya's door, ran uphill to a command-tier credential, Adrian's own, buried under a forged timestamp, and worse, it didn't stop at the relay schedules. There was traffic. A whole quiet correspondence, encrypted and routed through a dead comms buoy past the veil, and when Nova cracked it open, the 4 of them stood in silence, looking at what a coward will do to save himself. "He's been feeding them," Nova said, and for once there was no lightness in her at all. "For months. The Scour weren't supposed to breach the station. They were supposed to make a show of an attack Adrian could then repel, right on schedule to bury an inquiry into 3 convoy losses that were his fault. Bad orders. Ships he sent into a corridor he'd been warned was compromised, because admitting the warning meant admitting he'd ignored it. So he arranged a disaster he could be the hero of." A pause. The Scour, being the Scour, took the coordinates and decided not to perform. They just attacked. Turns out genocidal biohorrors are unreliable business partners. Who could have foreseen it? "He was going to let Draven bleed," Cooper said slowly, "to hide a paperwork problem, and pin it on." He looked at Arya. "On the woman everyone already believes is a monster," Arya finished. Her voice was very even, which Cooper had learned was how she sounded when something had gone all the way through her. "It's efficient. I'll give him that. Why manufacture a villain when the fortress has already agreed to one?" They did not get to savor the discovery, because that was the moment the station's long-range alarms went again. The real ones, the outer screen tone, and Nova threw the tactical plot onto the bay wall, and the plot was very bad. The Scour were coming back, and not with a raiding force this time. This was a fleet. This was the arithmetic of a billion dead kind of fleet, come to finish what the first strike had softened, and Draven's defenses were still half-scorched from the last round. "He gave them the fortress," Nova said. "The first attack was the down payment. This is the invoice. What happened next happened fast, and Cooper would spend a long time afterward trying to reassemble the order of it." Arya moved, really moved, the taciturn stillness dropping off her like a coat, and she was on the Iron Wake's bridge, and the ship was uncoupling from the dock before command had even finished issuing the panic. On the way, she opened a channel to the entire fortress, every screen, and she did the one thing Adrian had counted on her never doing, because she had spent years too tired to do it. She made noise. She played the correspondence. All of it. Adrian's own credential, Adrian's own arrangements, broadcast to every deck of Draven while the man himself was mid-sentence in the command center insisting the Iron Wake had gone rogue and needed to be fired upon. The order to fire on her did not come. It's difficult to order the execution of someone while your own voice, on every screen in the building, is selling out the station to the enemy. Adrian's face on the command feed did something remarkable and awful. The scheduled smile trying and failing to arrive, the pressed and polished shape of him coming apart at the seams in real time, and then men Cooper didn't recognize were taking him gently but firmly by the arms, and the feed cut. "That's the villain handled," Nova reported. "Now for the fleet, which is the part where we probably die. Cooper, why are you on my bridge? You are supposed to be on the station. You are a recruit. You carry crates." Cooper, who had absolutely not been assigned to the bridge, and had instead simply followed Arya and refused every subsequent instruction to leave, gripped the back of a chair. "I'm helping." "You're ballast." "He stays," Arya said. And that settled it. She took the iron wake out ahead of the fortress guns, alone, toward a fleet that outnumbered her past the point where numbers meant anything. And Cooper understood, with a cold drop in his stomach, that she was doing it again. The rift maneuver. There was a fold-out past the veil, an old wound in space that Nova had been quietly watching go unstable for weeks, and Arya was going to lure a fleet into a collapse the way she had lured the armada that vanished the 9th. Except last time she'd had a battle group and a plan and years of preparation, and this time she had a scarred ship, a panicking tech, a leak with a personality matrix, and a recruit who couldn't lift a crate. "You did this before and it cost you everything," Cooper said. "You went in and came out the far side and let them call you a murderer for it." "I came out the far side because I had somewhere to come out to," Arya said, threading the iron wake through the opening barrage, the ship shuddering, Nova calling numbers. "Last time I did the arithmetic alone." She glanced at him. One look, quick, and there was nothing armored in it at all. "This time there's someone in the chair across from me. I find I do the sums differently." Then the rift was ahead of them, a black seam pulling the starlight in, the scour fleet pouring after them into the throat of it, because the scour could not resist a wounded ship any more than they could resist a wounded world. And Arya took them in, and the fold began to close, and Cooper reached out without thinking and put his hand over hers on the controls. And neither of them let go as the whole hungry dark of it swallowed the fleet behind them and reached greedily for the ship as well. They came out the far side, but it was a near thing, and Cooper would remember it in pieces for the rest of his life. He would remember the sound the iron wake made as the rift's edge caught the aft section, a groan out of the hull like the ship itself deciding whether to keep existing. He would remember Nova's voice going through calm, then clipped, then very fast, reading numbers that were the difference between here and nowhere. He would remember Arya's hand under his on the controls, and the fact that neither of them let go, and how she brought the ship out of the collapse with the whole starboard side venting atmosphere, and one engine dead and the other one holding on out of what Nova would later insist was spite. And he would remember, most of all, the silence after day, the good kind this time, the kind that means you are still alive and surprised about it. As the fold sealed itself behind them with the entire scour fleet on the wrong side of it, gone the way the armada that took the 9th had gone, into a dark that did not give things back. "We're alive," Nova announced, in the tone of an AI who had run the odds and was personally offended by the result. "I want that logged. I want it in the permanent record that I said we'd die and I was wrong, because that is not going to happen again, and I intend to enjoy it." They limped home on one spiteful engine. Draven met them not with guns, but with every docking light it had left, which was fewer than usual, on account of the scorching. But the gesture landed all the same. The reckoning that followed was slower and less dramatic than a rift, and in its own way, more satisfying. Adrian's broadcast confession did what a lifetime of Arya's silence never could. It rewrote the record in public, on every deck, where it couldn't be quietly buried by tired men in briefing rooms. The inquiry he had arranged the whole catastrophe to avoid happened anyway, and now had considerably more to examine. He faced justice. Real justice. The slow institutional kind, stripped of rank and smile alike. And the 3 convoy crews he'd sent to die in a corridor he'd been warned about finally had their names cleared of the incompetence he'd hung on them. That mattered to Arya more than her own vindication did, Cooper noticed. She had spent so long carrying other people's arithmetic that watching someone else finally get theirs corrected seemed to ease something in her, that even the metal-shaped scars never had. And the record of Kessen's world was reopened too. Nova saw to that, leaked the real files with the gleeful thoroughness of an AI who had been waiting years for permission, and Draven learned, deck by deck, what its ashmaker had actually done. That she had done the sum no one else would sign. That the vanished fleet had been the enemy's, and the ninth had flown home the long way, and she'd let the lie stand because arguing cost more than she'd had to spend. The whispers changed. They didn't vanish. Legends never fully do. But they changed shape, from the kind you tell to frighten recruits into the kind you tell with something closer to awe. The immediate front went quiet after that. Losing a fleet into a rift will do that to an enemy. Even the scour, it turned out, could be made to reconsider. It wasn't peace. Cooper had been in the war long enough now, all of 3 weeks, to know better than to call anything peace. But it was a hard-won truce, a line that held, a stretch of dark that stopped trying to kill them for a while. You learned to be grateful for a while. As for Cooper, he was not a rookie any longer, though it took him some time to notice the change, the way you don't notice you've grown until an old shirt stops fitting. He still walked into the occasional crate, but he had stopped apologizing for existing mostly, and he had learned the far rarer skill of looking directly at the thing everyone else was too frightened to look at and asking whether the story was actually true. The frightened boy with the tray had become someone who sat down on purpose. Oliver, for his part, got a commendation for the system's work and told the story of the hack at every possible opportunity. And in his version, he had been calm the entire time, which fooled no one and delighted everyone, which brought them in the end back to the mess hall and to the table. The strange thing, the thing the whole fortress found quietly hilarious, was that the table nobody would sit at had become the table everyone wanted. Soldiers who had once taken the long way around now hovered nearby, hoping for an invitation that rarely came, because the woman who used to eat in a bubble of terror suddenly could not get a moment to herself if she tried. She found this exhausting and said so often to Nova, who found it the funniest thing that had ever happened, and said that, often, to everyone. But there was one chair Arya kept clear. She would set her tray down at that gleaming, once-cursed table, and no matter how the seats around her filled, the one directly across from her stayed empty. And the whole hall understood by now that it wasn't empty the way it used to be. It wasn't a minefield anymore. It was a place setting. Cooper came through the rush with his tray, eyes forward these days, and dropped into it without ceremony, the way you drop into a seat that is simply yours. The hall did not go silent. Somebody nearby was losing the meatloaf argument again. Some things outlast wars. Arya looked up from her meal, the sapphire eyes, the long ears catching the light. And this time the flicker had grown all the way into what it had always been becoming. That geological event finally arrived. A small, real, unhurried smile, aimed at exactly one person. "Is this seat taken?" Cooper asked, because he was not going to let a good line die. "It's taken," she said. And it was. Fear is a lazy detective. It takes the first suspect that fits the shape of the nightmare, and it goes home. A whole fortress of hardened soldiers looked at Arya and saw a monster. Not because they'd weighed the evidence, but because someone had handed them a story, and a story is so much easier to carry than a person. And then one exhausted, clumsy recruit sat down. Not out of courage. Out of ignorance. Because he hadn't yet been told who to be afraid of. And in that one accidental act, he did the thing everyone else was too frightened to do. He stayed long enough to find out whether the story was true. It's worth asking yourself in the quiet, how many people have you already decided about? How many empty chairs have you walked past because the room told you they were empty for a reason? We inherit our fears the way we inherit furniture. We're handed them. We arrange our whole lives around them. And we almost never stop to ask who put them there, or why, or what they were hiding. Cooper never grew braver exactly. He just grew curious. He kept looking at the thing everyone else looked away from, and it turned out the most feared woman in the galaxy had only ever been waiting for someone to sit down and see her. So maybe the question isn't whether monsters are real. Maybe the question is who benefits from you believing in them. And maybe somewhere near you, there is a table everyone avoids, and a chair that has been empty for far too long, waiting for the one person willing to walk over, sit down, and simply ask, "Is this seat taken?" The end. We've reached the end of our story, friends. In return for our efforts, please don't forget to press the like button below and leave your thoughts about the story in the comments. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. See you again very soon. Goodbye.